What I had to realize is that a mother is going to know far more about their child than I ever could, even if I met with their child 100 times in 100 sessions. And unless her perspective and mine are joined, there's not the ability to apply any expertise that I have to the situation in a way that's really going to be fitting.
Hello and welcome to And If Love Remains. I am very pleased to have with us a special guest, Eric J. Epstein. Eric has worked in social enterprise, theater, organizational consulting, education, and a range of health capacities. And these experiences have brought him closer to relationship with people in many walks of life. And so his writing does honor those on the edges of life and those that cross dividing lines in order to find meaningful ways to bring light into dark places. He has written a book called A Walk with Lady Wisdom that we're going to talk about. And he's also has a new book coming out that is a quasi children's story, but it can be loved by children and adults alike, and has great meaning to it, called The Chameleon and the Eagle, that we'll get into. But first of all, I'd just like to welcome Eric to the show. Welcome to And If Love Remains.
Thanks, Mike.
It's wonderful to have you. Let's start a little bit with a little bit of background. How did you where did you grow up? How did you get into the field that you're doing now? Give us a taste of what Eric Epstein's all about.
Well, that's not a simple question because I don't get an easy road for my life. I started with a zeal for learning when I was young that kind of made me ask questions that made people sometimes feel uncomfortable, and I didn't know what that meant, and so I started to ask questions in business and was in the business field for a while and was curious about how to make organizations run better. And I then became a teacher and asked questions with students and tried to find ways to learn and learn more effectively and learn creatively. And then I transitioned into health and mental health, and largely because there were members of my family that were struggling, and the typical solutions didn't work. And so I think a lot of times these uh, traveling between fields were because I had questions that needed to be answered.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. Um, and so you've worked a lot in mental health and counseling. And your book, A Walk with Lady Wisdom, kind of delves a lot into that. Talk a little bit about your book and kind of what was the purpose in you writing it.
Well, I was inspired initially because I kept being asked the question, "What are you doing?" Um, and this was by people who I was working with or clients, and it was actually usually positive, like what's happening to me and you is
Like,
not.
why are people having success or getting good results, kind of a thing?
Yeah, and they would try to fit what was happening into a framework that they were used to, like traditional psychological counseling, and it wouldn't fit. And so I had to ask myself that question: Why is this working? What's different? Because I had picked up methods from the people that I'd worked with over the years, and I hadn't intentionally tried to explain what they were. And as I started asking people who knew me, like, what is my style? What is it that I'm doing? These six women stories and answers were the most powerful. And so that um, allowed me to kind of deeply enter into their stories and how they overlapped with mine. And also in exploring wisdom and why wisdom in many cultures was seen as a woman, and potentially the link between female perspectives and learning and wisdom.
Oh, that's interesting. That's really interesting. And Yeah, and I want to get into those stories and specifically, why you used women's stories because I think that there's some powerful. I mean, the things you mentioned is powerful, but I think talking about why um, those stories and the experience that a woman has can be beneficial to understanding. But one of the things you mentioned to me was this idea of reciprocal dignity, and talk about that. What is that principle, and what do you mean by that?
Yeah. So when my children and family members were entering into health systems and education systems and were often not getting what they needed, one thing my wife and I found that was often an early indicator was if the person we were meeting with identified as an expert. If they thought they knew a lot of the answers already, they often were not curious enough to enter into our story enough for us to teach them and them to teach us and to start a cycle where we're actually both benefiting each other. And that was an early, uh, I guess, educational experience that showed me, as I worked as a teacher and as a counselor, that oftentimes I had to value what I was given by the people I was with, or I would not be able to offer them things that would fit their ways of thinking or fit their lives. And when this reciprocal process began, often students were teaching me as much as I was teaching them. Clients were teaching me as much as I was teaching them, and it was like we were building each other up in a cycle that got better and better over time instead of one way and ending at a certain period.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. Um, and as you were speaking, that reminded me of a story or a movie I saw, and I hope it applies to. It is a movie called Lorenzos Oil, and the story is somewhat of a father um, whose son was physically ill, significantly ill, and they and was not processing food properly. And I don't remember all the details. What I do remember is that he took it upon himself. He was getting all the wrong answers from anything the experts were telling him was not working, and so he bucked the system and tried to figure out his own answers and do his own research and try to figure out what was really happening because the most important thing to him was his son,
Right.
and made discoveries that that actually have helped people now because they discovered that everything they were doing was wrong. My point is, it's interesting to me that somebody, um, it sounds like with the things that were going on with your children or with your family, kind of um, you seem to realize that things weren't working and that you had to find another way to get the results that you needed.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a good illustration because what I had to realize is that a mother is going to know far more about their child than I ever could, even if I met
Yeah.
with their child 100 times in 100 sessions. And unless her perspective and mine are joined, there's not the ability to apply any expertise that I have to the situation in a way that's really going to be fitting. And I think that that's true, with the artist who did the cover of A Walk with Lady Wisdom. She, when I met her, she was a teenager and really struggling, and then I reconnected with her later in life, and she was having some pretty heavy struggles, and it would be easy to kind of say her life was sort of going in bad directions and to miss the value of her life. But in the forward of the book, she really shows how our relationship at both of those times was very respectful and drew out things from her and from me that bore fruit over time and then became this beautiful piece of art which we both worked on. And I didn't have any art skill, but I had a heart for her story, and she had this amazing skill and needed some inspiration to create this art piece. And so it's a great example of this culmination of uh, both of our gifts being brought together and creating something better than either of us could have made by ourselves.
Oh, that's wonderful, and it is a beautiful illustration. It's absolutely gorgeous, and I would recommend, everybody go. I think this is an interesting book that I think a lot of people can gain so much from. It's called A Walk with Lady Wisdom. The illustration is beautiful, and just before we get into that, I wanted to ask you one other thing that you mentioned in that kind of our pre-discussion. You talked about how this idea was the gateway to wisdom, and I think you spoke a little bit of it, that really, unless you as the expert, or the person with some sort of knowledge, and the person that, whether it's that's a parent, or the patient, or whoever you're working with, unless you're in total alignment, it doesn't work. Is that what you mean when you say that it's the gateway to wisdom?
Well, what I learned is there's sort of a reciprocal relationship between reciprocal dignity and wisdom, which is kind of
Okay.
complicated sounding. But um, basically, I am not at all against experts. I think we need experts. And uh,
Right.
I think it's great for people to dedicate their lives to becoming good at something. What we often miss in our culture is that when we specialize, we narrow our focus. And a narrow focus is good for certain things and not good for other things. And so, if we're going to have a broader perspective or deeper perception or be able to see things in proportion, we need the ability to step out of ourselves and see better. And often that is through a relationship where we're given something that's outside of ourselves to stretch what we have or to make it fit more effectively to a particular situation or a particular person. So, like you were saying before, with the Lorenzos Oil, unless there was the passion and scientific knowledge, as well as all of the failures and the love of the sun, all those ingredients together are an integration that culminated into a scientific discovery that could help lots of people. I think if that man didn't have the passion that came from loving his son and listening to his son, he wouldn't have been able to have the same motivation to pursue that particular scientific discovery if it was just something that he was doing on his own and was gently curious about. But because of his
Right.
love, he had a focus that drove him to accomplish what other people may not have.
Oh, and I know, um, that's very. And there's nothing more that focuses somebody than a child. I think. I mean, for a lot of people. Um, let's talk a little bit about A Walk with Lady Wisdom, and let's talk about, first of all, how you structured the book. As I read it, it's in a very interesting structure, and something that I had to kind of wrap my mind around as I began to read it. But there's some real usefulness to it. Talk about why you structured it the way it is, and how somebody should approach reading this book.
Well, when I researched the way that wisdom was perceived in lots of different cultures, I realized that wisdom often took many forms and not just one. So sometimes it was images, symbols that carried more meaning than just the picture itself. Sometimes it was kind of proverbs or easy to remember ideas that could be carried forward and be brought up useful in a moment. Sometimes it was stories that had rich illustrations. Sometimes it was letters. And sometimes it was long narratives that you had to kind of persist through to get the deeper meaning. And so, as I tested out some of these different elements with early readers of the story, I realized certain modes fit different people better than others. So there were scientists and engineers who read the poetic parts of the stories and were like, "Whoa, I don't get this," and they'd read the more technical parts and go, "Whoa, this is amazing."
Yeah.
And vice versa. There'd be a mom with a struggling child who would read a story and be very deeply moved, and then might read scientific literature applying to their child that they loved, and they would be able to then integrate those. So, in having these different modes of information delivery woven together into three stories, it allowed different people to be hit by different things, and to not have one mode that would leave a big chunk of people behind.
And I think, and I really appreciated that you did that. I mean, because there's some beautiful poetry in there. There are these kind of long narratives where you're getting the story. Sometimes it's in somewhat first person, sometimes it's from your perspective, um, and then you have almost these um, clinical fireside chats. It seems to be where you have a group of people discussing what's going on and and how it affects them. It's really interesting to go through.
Yeah, one of the challenges was there's a fictional piece alongside non-fictional stuff, and there were people who were concerned that you can't put fiction and nonfiction together without compromising them. But I wanted to have a wisdom group that could kind of look at these different experiences in the book from a larger, higher perspective, and kind of analyze them and find the good in them and pull them out for the rest of us to enjoy. And but it just makes it hard to choose where to put it on the bookshelf in a bookstore, because
Right.
that's another aspect of our specialized society, is that we want things to fit into a nice tidy category, and it's harder when you're trying to integrate lots of things together.
And that's and so probably the best place for people to pick up the book is at your website, ericjepstein.com. Is
That
that the best place for you want them to go?
that would be the best, because then I can write them a message or sign it. But it is also available at Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Walmart websites as well.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So yeah, go check it out, ericjepstein.com. And he's got a blog. He's got some really interesting things happening. Um, I want to talk a little bit about um, maybe some of the common elements in the three stories that you have. Obviously, they're all with women, and let's discuss that for a second. And you mentioned that you know a lot of time wisdom is depicted as a woman. Why do you think that is, and why did you specifically use women as the source material for this book?
That's a great question, and it was a little bit challenging at first, because I was embarrassed that I'm like, why can I, a man, think that I should be able to write about women? Or what do I know about women? Or directly asking my wife, like, sweetie, is it going to be okay with you if I'm, doing these intense, very deep, intimate interviews with a bunch of women? And I was really floored by her answer, and it really inspired me to persist. And that was, she said, this is our life ethic, um, to bring out the best in people and put it into practices that are mutual, that endure, instead of one time, one sided, flash in the pan type things. And so, as I was interviewing people to develop the book, these six women had stories that were very powerful to me, even though I was in it with them. And they stood out because I learned from them, and they each gave me important elements of what became my way of doing counseling, and now a team of people's way of doing counseling, because I'm a part of a larger health group, and we have used this reciprocal dignity practice to help each other. And it has grown beyond that to a network of organizations that are beginning to practice, or are already practicing this type of thing under a different name. And we're trying to learn from each other. And so, why the women, partly in the beginning, it was just because they did the best job of explaining what was going on, that made our counseling relationship something more powerful than just a one sided relationship. They would explain
I
to
hate to chuckle, but that is so true.
Yeah,
As a guy, it's it's hard to open up sometimes.
yeah. And, I think what they realized was their recovery was often linked to my recognition of what they were giving me. The
Mm,
insights that I could see in their stories that I could use to help other people, or their strength that would encourage me to want to write about their example on how to overcome a very hard thing, and their comfort with the idea that our relationship could be very platonic and respectful and still be very strong and beneficial and last beyond the formal meetings, where many of them now are professionals in the field of health and continue to send me things or help me with things. And it's been, instead of just a, hey, good job, see you later, it's been just ongoing gifts uh, to me and to them, and that we keep growing and the relationship continues.
that is, to me, that's absolutely beautiful. That is wonderful to see that, you know, that upward cycle, as you call it, continue and continue to grow. Um, but let's talk a little bit about maybe in general some of the common elements between the three stories. One of the things that I noticed um, is in reading the book is some sort of familia trauma or something problematic happening early in life that really continued through their life that was never really dealt with in a good way. Would you agree with that? And is that something that we should be aware of and really be conscious of?
Well, the six women mentioned in the book are definitely, in a way, like archetypes of the main ways that suffering uh, affects people. Um,
Great
they
ways to put it. Yeah.
it's not that there's not other varieties, but these six ways are probably, in my experience, the most common. And a lot of times it does begin early, because we know that early trauma just affects the whole rest of the life of the person unless it's somehow dealt with and integrated, um, mentally, physically, and emotionally. And it can't be something that is just partially dealt with, or it tends to have long term effects. And
And real quick, what does that mean? Like I've heard that before, to integrate trauma or to integrate these issues that people have. What does that look like? What does that mean? I sometimes struggle with understanding that.
well, basically, experientially, what's confusing about trauma is that it often is rooted in the body. Even if there's not a physical harm that was done, often emotional trauma is rooted physically. And so we would, in the field, tend to think talk therapy would help someone, and it wouldn't work oftentimes by itself.
Mm,
So, for example, I think a lot of us are used to stories about war veterans that would come home and they would hear a firecracker, but their body would act like it was a gunshot and they would drop to the ground without having a chance to think about it. It was like their body and brain took over. And essentially, what has to happen in order for trauma to move from something stored inside you that governs you and keeps you vigilant and keeps you looking for the next kind of harm that would come and stresses your system and on a regular basis, it needs to be a physical and mental accommodation that allows the person to see life differently and experience life differently. um, and so that could involve a combination of um, treatments or therapies that basically teach the body and the brain that the trauma is no longer a persistent present that's always there. It's something in the past that's moved away from. Um, and
mm.
that's it's not the easiest thing to do. It often involves working with multiple people and not just one. And that's part of the challenge of this work, is to do it well. You often have to be very attuned to the person in order to see what would be easy to miss as an early success, but not really dealing with the whole picture.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. Anyway, and I interrupted you as you were talking about some of these archetypes and some of the other, or some of the ways that these traumas can, I guess, manifest. Is that how you would
Yeah,
say it? Or
for sure. Yeah. So, one of the stories that was pretty powerful for me was a young woman who her trauma or her stress expressed as um, a a sexual desire, and that's partly because the trauma that she experienced was unstable men that were in her life and some sexual experiences from these men that were disruptive to her. And so she became an exotic dancer, but it wasn't because she was some bad person. She was actually trying to figure out how to figure out what a safe man was and how to operate in the world so that she wouldn't be stressed out all the time. And the rules of the dancing actually taught her some skills on how to soothe herself. And I had to go, even though I don't think that it is in the long term good for her to do that, I had to not judge that immediately as just bad and try to get her out of it too quickly. I had to understand that the rules of that negative experience were helpful for her temporarily so that she could then move on
I,
to what was better later.
it was actually providing a structure or something that she could latch onto in a way.
Yeah, and there just were rules on how to do that that taught her how
Right.
to um, feel safe with having a bouncer or somebody to protect her if something went bad, or that she, would be paid very well for her beauty and be appreciated. And, that's really hard stuff to accept when we would just want to go, that's bad. She shouldn't do it.
Mm,
Um, and if I had done that too quickly, our relationship would have ended. She needed me to
yeah.
see, she learned some things from it that she needed to carry forward to the next thing, or our relationship wouldn't have worked.
That takes me back to that reciprocal dignity that you talked about. One of the things I thought of, and I don't mean it to sound too crass or too simplistic, I guess, is it a lot of it is learning how to meet people where they're at spiritually, mentally, like learning to understand where a person is, and um in a very non-judgmental way. I think Covey said, people don't care about what you know until they know that you care.
Yeah.
It's that idea that I'm going to be there for you, and I'm they have to more. I mean, it's more than the brain. It's more than understanding that somebody wants to help them. It's almost a um, uh, uh, as you said before, it's a physical thing. Like I do know people that will shun people away who are literally trying to help them in every way they know how,
Right.
but because they're not meeting them where they're at, it's not being received.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things I had to learn as I was reflecting back on these different therapeutic relationships and even informal or familial relationships that had healing components in them was how to do that. Because, I think the polarization of our culture in America makes it so that we tend to go to one side or the other of liberal or conservative and not be able to draw upon the good of either one when it comes to
Right.
individuals. So, liberals tend to focus on being accepting. Accepting is great. That's that non judgmental stance. Conservatives tend to focus on morality and stability and tradition. Those are great. But either one, if they're applied wrongly, can not help or hurt a person. I mean, can hurt a person if they're applied wrongly. And so, in this situation with this particular woman, if I had applied morality too soon, it would have hurt her. She needed to be accepted first. She needed to know that I trusted and cared about her. And she needed to take the good that she had and realize what it was to carry it forward into the next thing. And so it was this combination of accepting and inviting her into a higher good that was modeled through the respect that I already offered her and that she offered to me.
That's wonderful. And yeah, that's a really great thing. And I think, as you know, again, one of the benefits of having um these as women is, as a, sometimes as a guy, um I can be pretty abrupt. I can be pretty like straight, like I see things in a very different way.
Sure.
And as I was reading this book, I was realizing even things, with my wife and my daughter, and just trying to think about, how they see it is maybe even more real, in the sense that it doesn't matter what is clinically or exactly right. What matters is how we feel about it, or how we deal with something. Um,
Yeah, a lot of times I think there are intuitive or emotional parts of relationships that are easy for us to dismiss if we get too focused on the practical or fixing it. And
yeah.
it's another great thing where we really need both. Like, it's great to be connected. That's often the beginning, and trust and connection is like the vital bridge to be able to walk it all. And then you really need to be able to be practical also and tackle the real specific things and do the specific work and practice the specific things to get better. And that's, in the male and the female, there's some things that tend to be there. And if we can honor both, and bring both together, we're much more likely to succeed with whatever we're dealing with than if we're assuming one way is the way, or one perspective is the right perspective.
It's fantastic. My name is Mike Levitt. I'm with And If Love Remains. We're talking with Eric J. Epstein. You can find his work at ericjepstein.com. We're talking right now about his book, A Walk with Lady Wisdom, which you can find at that website, ericjepstein.com. Eric, so you mentioned that this has kind of turned into a health group. It's turned into some sort of confederation. Talk about that. Like, how did that happen, and what's going on with that?
Well, one thing that struck me as a teacher was that teachers often have to operate in these little fiefdoms, these little private circles, castles, on their own. And even though they're a part of a school, um, it's very, very largely alone. And for counselors, it's often that way too, where because of confidentiality and because you're typically meeting with one or two people, um, it can feel pretty isolating. And what's gained is often hard to share inside the structures that are typical for our culture. And so, as I started to develop this passion for wisdom, I realized I needed to break out of those limitations and really share what I had, and invite others to share what they had, and begin weaving it together into things that were deeper and broader than I could collect on my own. And so, um, in for many years, I've been working with teams, and they've often been ones that I have helped pull together because I just was so passionate about wanting to work with other people. And so I have a health team that I work with called the Trusted Health Network, and a consulting group called Wisdom Lab, and a lot of informal circles of people that are really about taking these deep things that underlie a lot of our life, from a health, from a spiritual, from a educational perspective, and trying to go, okay, how do we take what we've been given or what we've found in our experiences and weave them together into things that are bigger than what we can have on our own. And I just think that's the way to go. That's the way to wisdom. Wisdom is often relationally cultivated, by a mentor to a mentee, or through powerful experiences with people who impact us. It's wisdom is not something that we tend to get just by reading in isolation or just by being a specialist in a particular area. That tends to be information and knowledge, but not necessarily the broader impact and the more powerful wisdom.
So would you, I mean, like I might make an assertion that wisdom, it has to be experiential. Like you have to experience it in order to gain it, or you have to at least have like it can't be found in isolation. As you said, you can't just it doesn't just come from on high. You don't just like it has to. You have to kind of work through it and make it. Um, you know, see it in action. I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Yeah,
Um,
in the book, I talk about it as it needs to be embodied, and
there you go.
and I think that that's both true in the fact that it needs to be expressed through a person, and it also needs to be embodied in terms of it being received relationally or offered relationally. Because I could tell you a bunch of words that would be good information, but if it's amplified by our relationship and how I know what would fit you, Mike, extra well. And and part of that is that I care about you and want to offer you the best of what I have. The information quality just goes way up, and the impact on you goes way up. And so what wisdom offers is that broader sight, that deeper sight that allows us to have more powerful relational connections that can then cultivate better information, better understanding, better connection. And that's what changes us and makes us able to have what we call wisdom when we approach specific situations.
And we've been talking about wisdom and these ideas in a on a very much individual basis, but how does that affect a community, an organization? If somebody buys into, or if a group of people buy into this concept, like what have you seen happen?
Well, there's a organization I've been working with for a while that I really love called Project I See You, and they began as a women's organization, and they were helping in the Dominican Republic people who had been affected by disasters there. And what was striking to me as I got to know them was that they were overt about the fact that they gained as much from these Dominican people as much as they were offering to them. And I was drawn to that because a lot of helping organizations and relief organizations will accidentally create dependency or transfer American values, as opposed to really develop mutually beneficial relationships. And so, as I began to work with Project ICU, I watched them uh, start to integrate men because they were empowering women in these different communities, and men were being affected by these empowered women. They were sometimes being left out because these stronger, more healthy women were taking places that they thought they were supposed to be. And so rather than the women saying, "Hey, sorry, men, we don't deal with you, we're a women's organization," they said, "Hey, the impact of our work is affecting these men. I guess we're now about men." And so they became about cultivating community, and that created more reciprocal cycles where the people who were helping and the people who were being helped changed hats at different times, and these communities created mutually beneficial cycles that allowed learning to be very deep. And so they then started a home for women who'd experienced homelessness in downtown Denver. And through various partnerships and relationships, what they'd learned in their own lives and in helping these Dominican women was coming back to help in the United States in a way that they couldn't have done had they not done that work previously.
Oh, that's wonder that I love that story. And I, I really think that we underestimate the power that, let me put it a different way. When we're struggling, or when we're hurting, um, I don't think we I don't think we realize the amount of good we can do by allowing others to help us, and allowing others to serve us, and really, that building on that strength, um, how that incorporated can build on a whole community. And when we look at things in that way, I think, when we see, and again, this comes from a guy's perspective. If I'm out of work, or if I'm struggling, or if I have a problem, a lot of times that is seen as a weakness on
Right.
my part.
Right.
When the reality is, that's just an opportunity for somebody else who might be stronger in that area to build me up, and together we become a much stronger community.
Yeah. One of the themes of the book was the ability to give and receive good, because like you're saying, I think pride will often make us go, hey, I guess I just have to suffer, because if I can't lift myself up, then it's not going to be done, because I don't want to receive help from other people. um,
Hmm.
but really, if we are cultivating the ability to fill ourselves so that we have more to give, and then we do give, that's what really a reciprocal cycle is made of, is going, I have to allow other people into my life to strengthen and build me up, so that when I hit hard times, it doesn't mean that that's a reflection on my character. That means that I now have something in my story that I can then offer. If I learn how to persist through that hard time and gain from it what can be gained, I now have a bit of wisdom to offer somebody who might experience something similar. And if people can help me in that process, then it's as if I have even more to give, because just doing it on my own is one form of strength. But to be able to say, hey, here's what did it for me. I received these different things from different people. This worked, this didn't. This part was really great. And now I can have more specific experiences to offer to the next person I run into.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that bit, and that is wisdom. I mean, just that idea is wisdom. It's fantastic. I want to talk a little bit about your upcoming book, The Chameleon and the Eagle. Tell me why did you decide to write another book, and what's this all about?
Well, I think it's a little bit of my rebellious self, going into a different genre, because I like to explore different things. And in the industry of writing, you're supposed to kind of stay in one genre and just do it over and over again. But I can't do that. So
I like how you think.
I, well, I love children, and I think a lot of times we dumb down children's books so that they don't feel accessible to adults. And so I would think of this as a tale for all ages, even though it has things for children for sure. And it just deals with this theme of flexibility and solidness, which are both vital in people. And it's the story of this powerful eagle who is the embodiment of strength and values and ethics, and this small chameleon who has the ability to change colors and flex with lots of situations and connect with lots of different kinds of people. And at first, they don't like each other, and they're kind of compelled to interact. And it's tense because the chameleon thinks he's going to get eaten, and they have to work out how to be something together. And it's in that bit of the story that I think it is the most beautiful pieces that we might need right now, because so much is
Yeah.
polarized, and so often it's hard for us to look at people who are different than us and go, how do we actually do the work of coming together? It's nice to say we should, but how can it actually happen?
Well, I think that's particularly true right now. Yeah, we're speaking today. It's November 3rd of 2020, and not only have we gone through a pandemic and all kinds of crazy things are going on in the world, but today is election day, And as we get closer to election day, I mean, all I hear are straw man arguments from both sides. I mean, it's absolutely just, you know, one side's Hitler and the other side's Stalin, and there's just nothing in between. And the idea that we both, on whether it's political ideas, whether it's um, uh, um, different genders, whether it's, you know, different ideas in general, not everything is in the world of ideas is not a binary thing. Um, when if we can't come together and learn from each other, um, you know, I think that's a story that needs to be heard more right now.
Yeah, there's a blog story that I just wrote to try to illustrate that point and to kind of show how reciprocal dignity can be applied to seemingly impossible differences. And in that story, I'm teaching a class on ethics, and there's half the class is pro-life and half the class is pro-choice. And I think I'm going to die because they're going to kill each other, and I'm going to get fired. And I think there's no way to have this discussion and have it go well. But I work really hard to try to find what I can and to set the stage for understanding. And I'll go ahead and spoil part of it and say that uh, one question is found that brings both sides together and makes them want to work together to develop a clinic that would reduce abortion in the United States, and their ideas are brilliant because they honor women and they reduce abortion. And then both sides are happy and they want to work together and they don't have to spend millions of dollars to fight. Um, and, you know, it
Yeah,
seems like that's impossible, but this group of students accomplished what maybe a lot of people couldn't imagine could be done.
that that is a great story. I did read that on your blog. I'd encourage everybody to go read that because it is a story of, um, you know, how people with disparate, I don't know, I think I made up a word, ideas
That work.
can come together and find something that, you know, that they, you know, if you could find one thing that we can agree on, you know, we can build on that. As long as there's one thing we can agree on, we can build on that and build something. So that's a great story.
I was encouraged
Um,
because I didn't think that in our polarized environment that people would be drawn to stories like that, but it that one in particular is getting a lot of interest, and that's so hopeful for me that maybe one of the outcomes of weariness with polarization is that people will hunger for constructive dialogue and the ability to listen well and the ability to find ways to heal from the wounds that have come from this hard time.
oh yeah, you know, it's interesting. I was just the other day, in fact, in my last podcast, I was talking to Dr. Elias Pedersen. We were talking about um, musicians and musicianship, and one of the things he talked about was how he thought it was so important for everybody to learn music at a high level. And the reason why it was interesting is because it allowed people to become self-critical, to be able to look at what they're doing, not take it personally, and look at things that they're doing wrong and that they can improve upon.
Mm.
And I think there's a lot of truth to that, you know, as long as, you know, we can get to the point where we can look at our weaknesses, or things that maybe we don't even agree with, but we can look at things from a more analytical, or in a way that can allow us to improve without taking things personally. That would be such a beautiful thing.
Yeah, step music is amazing for helping us step out of ourselves. And if you're learning some new thing like music that is so rich and lets you, for a time, not be so personally affected by whatever, you get to be informed by like a whole nother language.
Right.
And I have a dear friend that went to uh, Russia when the wall had just come down, and he was standing outside the gulags and was interviewing people. who were coming out of these terrible, horrific prisons and saying, why did you survive when so many people died? And one of the things that was consistently mentioned was dark humor. And, I think in some ways, that's like music, like it takes us out of ourselves
Yep.
in a way that like humor does, or like dark humor does in dark times,
Yep.
to go, okay, this suffering isn't everything. We don't have to hyper focus on differences and fears. There are bigger things at play here that can give us peace and comfort. And that's where we
Mhm.
need to put our focus so that we don't dwell on what can tear us apart.
Oh, that's beautiful, and I think that's probably a good place that we can leave it. I'm talking with Eric J. Epstein. I've really enjoyed the conversation. He's the author of 2 books, A Walk with Lady Wisdom, and the upcoming The Chameleon and the Eagle. When will that book be coming out?
That should be released in 1 week if all goes according to plan. So that'll be available on the website and also on Amazon.
All right, so go check it out at ericjepstein.com. Thank you, Eric. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope we can do it again. It's been a lot of fun for me.
Thanks, Mike. I hope so too. I've really enjoyed it as well.
Great. So this is And If Love Remains. You guys, you can check us out at www.andifloveremains.com. We do have a merch site, but the most important thing that you can do if you find these ideas helpful, if you think that this that the work that Eric is doing is important, can be helpful to somebody else, pass it along, share it with people, share it with your friends. You don't know who needs to hear this stuff. So thank you again, Eric, for being on the show. This is And If Love Remains.